Free from fins. Chapter 7. Bree and Daniel waited at sea in a small rowboat. Bree's father, King Bardo, still hadn't come. She was losing her patience with her father. In her mind, she screamed at him until her lungs gave out. The stakes of both Avani and Baldwin were increasing. Elsa certainly intended to take over one way or another. The other thing screaming in Bree's mind was to tell Daniel everything. He had to know what was hanging over their heads now that Elsa had mixed herself even more in Bree's troubles. Sure, Bree knew that she had little proof that Elsa was really Elsa, but her gut and her eyes told her so. During the entire ball, Bree heard Elsa's voice reach above the rest. She grinned much like her too whenever their paths crossed. Bree didn't need anything else to tell her that it was the Sea Witch. Daniel reached and took Bree's shaking hands. She didn't even know she was trembling until then. He warmed her hands with his and said, "He'll come." At that point, Bree knew it was no use. She knew her father. He never forgives. King Bardo was just like Daniel's father, King Philip. They both had hardened hearts as Minta had described it. It wouldn't matter if he got the letter or not. He wouldn't come. And if he did, it wouldn't be to chat peacefully. Bree lost her willpower and started to cry, something she had never experienced before due to the fact tears couldn't be seen in the water. Daniel took her in his arms, careful not to make the boat tip over. She finally felt as if she was playing the role of a dumb girl. She felt stupid crying when she should toughen up. She had to stop a war. Crying wouldn't help her, and neither would love. She had said she never wanted to marry, but Daniel had changed that. Everything had spun out of control and there was little she could do to stop it. Instead of preventing herself from crying, she cried even more. That's when Daniel let go of her only to move his hands to her neck and cheek. Then he pulled her in for a kiss, which tasted salty, but then it became sweet. Immediately her sobs stopped. The remaining tears slipped down her cheeks, but no more came afterward. When they both backed away, Bree's eyes stung from her tears and were red and puffy. She didn't care anymore about the crying as she threw herself at him for a hug. She moved too quickly though, and the boat tipped. They fell into the water, drenching their clothes. Once they resurfaced, coughing up seawater, Daniel started to laugh. "Oh, what other experiences have I to encounter with you?" Daniel helped Bree back into the boat, then he lifted himself in. He was about to say something else when he saw Bree with her hair wet. She looked so in place as the water dripped from the ends of her locks. He could no longer ignore the questions he had for her. "Bree?" She looked at him through her lashes. "Please tell me that I haven't gone crazy in my chase of mermaids." Daniel leaned in closer. Are you not the mermaid who saved me that night?" For the first time since the night he spoke of, Bree allowed herself to speak to him. Yes. Bree watched his face carefully as he took it in. There was no going back now. Hopefully, Minta would understand why Bree decided to tell him. Cooling down his emotions, Daniel asked, "How come you've kept quiet?" Bree looked away, sensing the anger he was trying to hide from her. "I didn't want to hurt you. I wanted you to be free from the power of my voice." All the anger he had melted away. "Then I finally have my point proven. There are good mermaids." He stood happily, shaking the boat. "Sit down, before we go under again," Bree exclaimed. Daniel followed her demand, and Bree realized she just used her power on him. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to order you to." Daniel kissed her again, and this time it lasted much longer. Bree was confused if he was acting on his own or under her power, but she curled her fingers into his hair anyway. Judging by how he was kissing her, Bree could only assume it was on his own terms. When they broke apart from the kiss, he took her hands. "There is no need to apologize to me. I understand completely what you've been up to this whole time. Though I'm not keen on the lying part, however, you could always tell me your real story. Bree sighed, all right. I'm the youngest daughter of the King of Baldwin, King Bardo. I was supposed to get married but I ran away. I wanted to prove I could be of use and confirm that humans weren't what they seemed. She bashfully looked at Daniel. His cheeks rose, and he bowed to her the best he could in the boat. Your Highness. It's an honor. Daniel tried out Bree's title next, Princess Bree. I think I like it. Bree laughed, then she went on to the critical information he needed to know. Daniel, she began, taking his hands, I need to tell you something about Princess Nicolette. What about her? She's not the princess. One of her maids is. So she has a decoy? What's the problem with that? The real Nicolette came to me and said that her decoy isn't who she says she is. I believe that it's the sea witch Elsa. She's the one who gave me my legs in exchange for my voice. And if I don't succeed in convincing my father to stop the war, it's my soul too. Daniel tweaked his head a bit. You traded your soul and voice for legs? Yes, please don't think of me as reckless. He laughed, how could I not? That's as reckless as it gets, I mean unless you did it because of the love at first sight thing. I didn't do it because of that, she fumed, and I definitely didn't fall for you at first sight. After a quick chuckle, he grew serious. What do we do about this, Elsa? Bree, letting his comment go, shrugged, I have no idea. All I know is that she doesn't want the war to stop. How many days do you have left? 4, but Elsa has already taken some of my voice. She said she would by the middle of the week. I thought she meant the middle of the 7 days she gave me, but I guess not. Daniel nodded, 4 should be enough. I think the first thing we need to do is convince your father. I'd hate to lose you. Bree shook her head, unfortunately, I think the first thing we need to deal with is Elsa. Besides, if we beat her, then she couldn't take my soul at all. Daniel rested his forehead on Bree's, if that's what you wish then we'll start there. What an evil world we live in. Bree reached up and brushed his cheek. I agree. If only there was some way we could convince them the war will solve nothing and that we've all been deceived. I think we should head back, Daniel said now that they knew Bree's father wasn't going to come. We'll sleep on it. Before he started towards the shore, he kissed Bree again. She smiled, glad all had gotten out and somehow Daniel loved her still. When they got back, they took a secret passage inside the castle walls. They didn't want to explain to the guards where they had been all night. During this time, they realized they had another problem to worry about, the little thing they hadn't declared fully as love. Both brushed it aside and decided they could leave that to deal with if they lived through the next 4 days. Daniel led Bree to her room. They were both soaked to the bone, but they didn't want to arouse anyone to fix that. Besides, he got to admire her with her hair wet like when he first saw her saving his life, though it was a fuzzy memory. Thank you, Bree said ever so quietly. You're welcome, he said leaning in as if he was bowing. Bree went into her room. Daniel waited outside her door, thinking to himself. Out of all the things that could have happened that night, he was stunned by the results. He knew he'd probably end up kissing Bree since he'd been wanting to for a while, but he didn't expect to learn she was the princess of the High Kingdom of the Merfolk. Sure, he could have guessed she was a mermaid, but a princess as well. He didn't know if that would help clear his father's mind or make it worse. He did have to marry a noble after all. Daniel finally left to go to his own room. He made sure that he stayed away from where his father placed the fake Princess Nicolette. He didn't want to take any chances of passing by if it only took a seemingly harmless tune to lure him in. It was no wonder the princess had a bewitching voice when he danced with her. Without any trouble, Daniel made it to his room. He crashed on his bed even though when he was with Bree, he felt wide awake. Sleep took him and his dreams wandered from dream to dream. Most he would forget by morning, but there was one that stood out to him. One with a small child speaking to him. "Daniel," the child spoke, clearly a girl's voice, "Daniel. The war will arise. You must wound it well. The monster will not stop until you do. They will grasp at straws for reasons to go to war. You must be prepared." "What do you mean?" Daniel asked. "You need to prepare for battle. The monster is awake. Watch for the monster of Elsa's. Prepare for war." "Why?" "I'm not against the merfolk. We don't need war," he protested. "You aren't fighting them. You are fighting yourself and the monster," the child said as she disappeared. "The monster?" Daniel whispered in his dream. Daniel's window blew open. A cold gust of air swept in. He shivered as he got up to close it only to realize it was morning. He sighed, starting to push the window close, but then a paper drifted in before he could. He locked the window before he went to look at the sheet. Carefully, he picked it up. His jaw dropped when he saw what it was. It was a blueprint for the biggest ship he'd ever seen. It couldn't have been a mistake to have blown in his room after having that dream. There's no possible way he could get his father to give him permission to build such a thing unless he said it was for going to war with the merfolk. He didn't know if he could say that with Bree around. He'd have to talk to her first. Daniel rolled up the paper and stuck it in the chest by his bed. His first order of business was to gather his grandmother, Bree, and probably Topsy as well. He knew he could trust all three of them, even though Topsy was a blabbermouth for the most part. Going out of his room, Daniel was disappointed when his father caught him by the shoulder. "Son, you ready to spend the day with the princess?" "Father, I was actually hoping to talk to you later after I, talked to grandmother about it first." "Why my mother first?" he asked. Daniel tried to look for a way out. "Oh, I haven't had breakfast yet. I'll see you later." He rushed forward just enough so his father wouldn't try to track him down. With relief, Daniel made it to the dining area where all three of the girls he wanted to see sat eating. He motioned them in a tight circle. Then he looked around just to be sure no one else was there. "I had a dream." Topsy burst into laughter. "How interesting." Daniel glared at her. Topsy stopped laughing and returned back into the tight circle over the table. Minta made a hand motion, telling him to continue. "The dream was about being prepared for battle and some monster. Then in my room, the wind blew in the instructions for a ship." Topsy still looked like she was trying to hide giggles. Minta and Bree just exchanged glances, not sure what to think. "Anything else you remember, like who told you?" Minta asked. "It was a golden figure of a child. Its voice was a girl's, I'm sure of that." Minta gasped, "It must be the creator." Topsy turned to her grandmother. "What?" "Like she would talk to Daniel." "And what's to be odd about him getting instructions for a boat?" "Because the battle is going to be over water," Bree answered, surprising Minta and Topsy. Daniel and Bree shared a smile. They did some quick explanation of what happened the night before. Minta clicked her tongue as she was reminded of the danger Elsa presented. "Well, I can't blame Bree for breaking her promise to warn you of that sick siren strolling the castle." Just then they heard steps coming their way from the other side of the door. As they parted from the circle, Daniel quickly asked, "I'm going to ask Father if I can build the ship, but I'll say it's for the war with the merfolk. I want each of your advice first though." Bree and Minta nodded gracefully to him. Topsy gave him a thumbs up as the doors opened. She turned her movement into an awkward way of picking up her fork in front of her. Elsa, her maids, and Nicolette, still dressed as a maid, entered the room. Nicolette stepped to the side of the room with the other maids and watched carefully as Elsa sat down next to Daniel. Elsa smiled pleasantly, unaware of them knowing who she was. Daniel tried to act normal by giving her a smile in return. No one else bothered to show her courtesy. Bree glared at Elsa, hoping if she stared long enough Elsa's true nature would reveal itself. Sadly, that didn't happen. Brushing off her new white dress for the day, Elsa said to them, "How was everyone's night? I know I couldn't get to sleep at all." "I wonder why," Minta said flatly. Elsa looked up at the Queen. "Excuse me, Your Grace? Did you say something?" Minta made eye contact with the siren. "We all know Derwin is far from your home. It must be awful to sleep on something comfortable instead of a bed that feels like seaweed." Bree looked sternly at Minta. Though Minta proved to be wise, she wasn't thinking before she flashed around hints that she knew who Elsa really was. Bree turned to Elsa to hear what she might say. "Well, Derwin's lucky that you're no longer the true queen," Elsa said simply while taking a tiny, delicate sip from her teacup. Before Minta could scoff, Bree stood. All eyes fell upon her. Elsa arched her eyebrows and hinted at her evil smirk through her eyes. Then Elsa got her message. "You'd like to speak with me, Mute?" Elsa asked. Bree nodded and headed towards the door. Daniel grabbed her hand, but it slipped right out. Elsa followed behind Bree until they were out in the hall. That was when Bree slammed Elsa against the wall. Elsa laughed. "Oh, what a change in character." "Shut it, Elsa. I know it's you. What are you doing here? Trying to go back on our deal?" "I'm not the one who suggested it. I made another deal, you see. It was much more foolhardy. Of course, I still get what I have of your voice. Sadly, not all of it or your soul. I don't know if you should thank them for striking the deal with me or not. I'll let you decide." "What do you mean? Who struck a deal with you?" Bree said forcefully. A smirk appeared on Elsa's face. "Your pitiful father."